My friend suggested that what then seemed a novel idea. He said, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me for me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. What would I have it? Of course I would. Thus was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view.
Okay, so this is a very interesting part of the book because he talks about, despite the living example of my friend, I mean, Ebby has clearly changed. You really can't argue with the transformation he's undergone. And yet, Bill says, there remained in me the vestiges of my own prejudice. Now, vestiges are like remnants. Think about them as imprints that fossils make. So even though Bill has all this proof right in front of him, he's still got some prejudice going on. And what does it do to him? Just these remnants, just these imprints of an old idea. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. So just mention God, and antipathy is intense hatred. And then it says, and when the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. So what that tells me is the power of resentment. Because all I need is a remnant of an idea of something that happened 30 years ago, and I am right back in that seething, intense hatred. So it's very important that we dig deep and do the spiritual surgery, because it's deep resentment that poisons our spirit. Okay, so I find that fascinating. It doesn't take much, right? It just doesn't take much to get us going. And then this idea of a God personal to me, it was intensified. He had never heard of such a concept growing up. You know, God was in the heavens and had nothing to do with human affairs. And he even talks about it on the bottom of page 10. And when it says, when they talked of a God who is love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated. And my mind snapped shut against such a theory. And I think the reason is because he'd never experienced that. So it is irritating. I mean, when I was 12, I was walking to religious instruction with my friend Debbie, and she said, I have a personal relationship with God. And I'm like, huh? I'm like, why do you have one and I don't? You know, how can you have one and I don't? It's like, that can't be right, because I should have one too then. Where's mine? You know, anything that someone else has, I certainly want. So, and so this really annoyed me, because I had no idea of what that was about. But I love the words they use. Love, superhuman strength, and direction. If we really had at our access love, superhuman strength, and direction, that would be okay with me. I could be down with that, right? So, and he calls it a theory. My mind snaps shut against such a theory. Well, we're going to talk in a minute about a foundation of willingness. If my mind has snapped shut about one idea, I got a long way to go. And he used the word theory, which is something that demands proof. Now, the interesting thing about theories is, if anybody remembers anything about geometry, who knew we were going to use it in AA? But every theorem we were ever given in high school had a given or an assumption at the top of it, and that we had to decide was true. It's even called an assumption, assume this is true and use this to solve this problem. And we never said, oh, I'm not going to believe that. I'm not going to believe that angles are 90 degrees. Yeah, I refuse. I mean, I never, argued with geometry. I hated it, so why would I, but I didn't argue with it. But the idea is, if we can't accept that as true, we can't solve our problem. And when we get to we agnostics, it's the same idea. You have to decide that God is true, or something bigger than you is true. And if there's enough proof around us, why not? I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Be proven wrong and be right where you are, or worse? Okay? So, Bill's testing, Bill's going to get into testing the theory. So anyway, so it says here, okay, I can go over the conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, spirit of nature, czar of the heavens. And those were all phrases that came out of that time. There was a book called The Science of Mind, and it was the first foray into spiritual connection rather than godly. And it was, it used all these kind of words, and really, and it's this thick. And it all comes down to there's something bigger than us out there, and it's the thing itself. It's the thing itself. But it merges science and spirituality. Anyway, so it seems reachable. But then Ebby does this, because Bill's like, I'm not going to agree with that. He goes, okay, then why don't you choose your own conception of God? And that ends the argument. He can't say, well, no, I can't do that. Why not do that? But here's the fascinating thing. In the writing of the big book, Bill Wilson always believed in a deity as a God. He always believed in a certain thing that was one, and it was God. Now, what he was saying was, and this is what Bill was saying later, but Ebby gives him this idea, and Bill ran with the idea as he wrote this book. Yeah, choose any God you want, whether it's behind Judaism or Judeo-Christian, or he really was associated with one of the world's religions that had a one kind of God thing. He did not expect and did not know and did not see the divine intervention that would occur, because by putting that phrase in the book, it opened the door for everybody for generations to come. And now we can believe in the spirit of nature and the spirit of the universe. And that was not Bill's intent. His idea was much smaller. But by giving that statement and putting it in the book, he unknowingly opened the doors for every single person who had a doubt about a higher power. And that's how I love how even when Bill thinks he's doing right, God can make it better. All right? And so he says, that statement hit me hard, and I've got a sponsee that says, I realized I don't have to believe everything I think, which is great. That means I can open my eye to new ideas. And so here's this step 2 concept in the italics. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required as part of this process. Certain dominoes have to fall for me to make my beginning. And then he says, I saw that growth could start from that point. So it's important that we who get recovered come and share how we developed our relationship with God in spite of our doubt, in spite of our skepticism, in spite of whatever our religious experiences were as children, whether there were some or none or went sideways on us. It's saying here, try to believe in something different and keep your ears open, because something will reach you that you can identify with. And meanwhile, just the fact that you're going to AA indicates a willingness to believe in something else. So you can begin right where you are. And you don't have to believe to begin. That's the beautiful thing. And then it says, upon a foundation of complete willingness. Willingness means a disposition to do something. So the only way you can measure my willingness is if I actually do it. I'm willing to go to the Sunday night meeting. I'm not going because it's raining out, but I'm willing. That's not willing. I've got to be disposed to do it. All right? And then it says, and this is important too, it says, I might build what I saw in my friend. I might build. I've got to do the construction. I've got to do the seeking so that I can build what I want of my life. My first sponsor said many times, you do the possible, God will do the impossible. Okay? And he said, I might build what I saw in my friend. Now, how it came out for me was the woman who shared her experience in the beginning, and when I heard her share, I was like, yeah, maybe that would be okay. But I wasn't saying I might build what I saw in her. I was thinking maybe my life won't suck as much. That was what I heard. That's what I felt. Maybe if I do that, it won't suck as badly. I kept the goals low. And then it says, would I have it? Of course I would. Okay? So it's important that we go to where we can hear it and keep open-minded and be willing to believe in something greater than ourselves. And honestly, if you think about it, when I was drinking vodka, that was definitely greater than myself. Okay? Who's got comments, observations? Okay, fine. Continue resting, and we'll carry on.
All right. Thus was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. And so it had been ever since. How blind I had been. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, but I showed signs of delirium tremens.
Okay, so in the plain language big book, it talks about the simple question of to create your own idea of a God. Said it changed everything for Bill. All of my fear and doubt melted away. I felt like I'd been living in shadows for years. And then he says, I realized I didn't need to suddenly become a man who went to church every day and had total faith in God. I just had to be willing to believe in something greater than myself. And that was the one thing I needed to begin moving away from my drinking problem. Okay? I just needed to accept that I was not the only person or force guiding my life. And then he talks about the significance of Winchester Cathedral. Well, to go back to the scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes, a new world came into view. It's funny how certain lines in the book I didn't see until I was ready to see them. And I don't know how many years I read this without seeing a new world came into view. And what that was what my future might look like if I stayed sober. I came to meetings at first and I was like very suspicious of this whole deal. Seemed like a cult. You know, the God talk didn't scare me too much because I was raised with a faith, even though it was all backwards and crazy by the time I got here. But I didn't want to, I didn't want to be loved till I could love myself. I didn't want to go to lunch with you guys. I just wanted to come in and get the information and scurry out. But I got a good sponsor who directed me to stay and listen and engage and introduce and be of service. It's much easier to be talking to somebody next to you if you're doing something together. So this new world started to come into view, maybe because I really thought if I stop drinking, who are going to be my friends? Where am I going to hang out? We're like a whole subculture out there, man. It's great. And I didn't know about it. And I didn't know how full it was going to be of people that were just like me. I mean, we're not teetotalers if we're sitting in here on a Sunday night. So I like the idea that little by little, I began to see a hope for the future. And that's good too, and that's another reason to keep coming back, because every day we sort of start out of gas, I wake up kind of out of gas from yesterday, and I got to start the routine again and get a little revved up and then connect with people, and then it takes me through the day. By the end of the day, I'm out of gas. Sometimes I'm out of gas at 9 o'clock if the wrong person, cuts me off in traffic, because that's my last frontier. Okay, so then he talks about the real significance of his experience in the Winchester Cathedral. He went to Winchester Cathedral because he was so afraid he was gonna die. He didn't go there because he had time to kill before he was gonna be sent into action, and he never was, by the way. But he started to see, the effects of war in London, and it scared him. It was all exciting until he got there. And he went to Winchester Cathedral to pray to God to give him courage. And he was deeply moved by the experience, which meant something happened. And he equates it with, when I was willing enough and humble enough, God showed himself to me. And it was only a glimpse. We know that Bill, he talks about his white light experience being the time when he was laying in bed after he had his second or third. The thought came to me while I was lying there that I might, it's going to be on page 14. And that's his white light experience, which wasn't at the cathedral, but he did have a significant spiritual effect in the cathedral. And what he says was, for a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God, and there had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. Bill also believes that humble willingness means praying on our knees, no matter what the religion. And I remember my sponsor telling me to do that, and I hadn't done that since I was a child in the religion of my childhood, and it felt very awkward. I feel like I'm a phony. I don't really deserve this. I'm not a very holy person. You know, it took me a long time to realize we go to God because we're not holy. We don't go to God because we are. But it takes a while to figure that out. But there has to be a humble willingness, and the action of me getting on my knees in front of something that I have to learn to develop a relationship with was the single most powerful thing that I did getting sober, and it's the single most powerful thing I do today. It definitely makes this egomaniac holy. And I see your handle, Liana. I'm just going to finish this sentence going to the top of 13, and then we'll talk about it. And so then he says there was a humble willingness, and he came. But, bottom of page 12, soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within himself. The sense of his presence. See, we're feelers. We need to feel it. I need to feel the sense of that buzz. I need to feel it. It's no good to know vodka is running through me if I'm not getting buzz from it. You know, so this is the same idea here. We want to feel the presence of God. And if we don't get this thing, then God's not there, which is pretty, spiritually immature. The idea is God is always there. We're the ones that shift, right? But what happens is sometimes we're going along better. The channel's clear. I started out with a good day. I did a good nightly review last night. I don't have anything left over that I should have fixed. I don't have an amends I need to make that's bugging me. I'm good. I'm clear. But it says, but the sense of his presence gets blotted out by worldly clamors. Worldly are of the world, and clamors are loud, incessant noises. So what happens is the noise of the world, the bad traffic, that stupid argument I had that really was nothing, but now it's making me feel terrible, the resentment toward the nephew because he's not helping me get things done, or whatever. Mostly this noise within me keeps me from being connected to God. So it's up to me to clear out the noise so that I can feel once again walking in the sunlight of the Spirit, however you put it. But we know when we're a little jammed up spiritually because we're not feeling that great. And and we don't feel like God is there. But he is, it's just that he's covered up by all of our thoughts, whether they are anger, fear, just anxiety. We got plenty of words for it. Liana. So decisions. He was able to make some decisions in a moment of when he was starting to feel some power come back into his life. And as we know, we can feel power in the meetings, but if we're early in sobriety, we may not be able to hang on to it from day to day. And again, that's why we've got to, refuel. Okay. You can keep going.
Okay. I'm sorry, I lost my place. Oh, there I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since.
Okay, so he says here, when I was in the hospital, I made a silent agreement with God. I asked God to care for my health and well-being and promised I would listen for his direction. I thought long and hard about all the hurtful decisions I'd made, and I asked God for forgiveness. I had never been able to forgive myself, but when I made this agreement with God, I finally felt forgiven. It was like I'd been carrying a huge weight on my shoulders, and God took that weight away from me. I have not had a drink since. And what I like here, it talks about, I ruthlessly faced my sins. Now, if people did not have a religious upbringing, some people might find that word bothersome. Sin. Sounds churchy, And, but scientifically, and the one force, one source, sin is a degree of error from the ideal. Sin is a degree of error from the mark. And it disconnects us. So if you think about a bullseye, it comes from, trigonometry. And it talks about sine, but it's sin, and it's an angle. It's a degree of an angle that veers off from the intended target. So I like to think of sin as where I've missed the mark. And I can look back at my life, and I can tell you that conduct on prom night missed the mark. Yeah, I did not want to pull that stuff in prom night. I mean, I was the queen of the prom for crying out loud. Only because I was going out with the cutest boy. It was always a catch. But I can look back in my life and see how many times my conduct missed the mark. And over time made me feel bad about myself. And it had nothing to do with God judging me or not, although there was some of that because of my religion, but it was really more about what it did to my soul. And this decision to go with God was a good first step in the right direction. I was going to need more encouragement and more support to stay on that path. And I was going to have to be agreeable to some correction. But it was better than me. I had enough of those experiences on my inventory where I'd missed the mark that I wanted them taken away. Okay? And that's the other thing. It's only after Bill does this list, and it's in the moments following that list that he's ready to have them removed, root and branch. Step 6 is a state of readiness that follows 4 and 5. That's why there's such short paragraphs in the big book. If done effectively and thoroughly, that's how you should feel after 4 and 5. Ready to be rid of it. Doesn't mean you will be. Doesn't mean it'll all happen at once. We have to continue to object and ask God to show us the way through it. But it should be a landing place from an effective 4 and 5. Okay? All right.
Okay, my schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. We made a list of people I had hurt and toward whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability.
All right, so he's going through these steps. Now, there's no proof that there were any written steps anywhere. Some people hand wrote kind of what they did, and there's a list of 6 steps of the Oxford groups. But the Oxford groups, as far as I've ever seen, never showed, here's our steps. But because it was handed down like Indian lore. It was handed down from person to person, and everybody had their own modifications. But what I like, and what it does say many times about this inventory, we made the inventory. We made the inventory. A lot of these people were still in the hospital. They weren't writing. They were, So that's why it says, ready to have someone hear your story. The protege starts sharing their story, and the sponsor's writing down the things that are relevant. Now, we've done it, it's been modified over the years, and when I do my 4-step, my sponsor's writing too. And she's making notes of the people that definitely need to have some kind of amendment made. And then we talk about the nature of that, and we go with the easiest ones first. But again, the book says we made it when we took inventory, and that's exactly what happened. There was no, hey, work on your 8-step list and I'll see you in 2 weeks. I was done with 5. She goes, 8-step list. I'm like, wow, we just keep going, I guess. No pausing, right? And so it says, I made a list of people I'd hurt and also the people who made me angry. I told my friend I wanted to talk with every person on the list and admit I'd been wrong. I promised I wouldn't blame these people or criticize them during our conversations. I just wanted to make things right between us if I could. This was to be part of the process of getting sober. Okay, so that's how he explains that paragraph we just read. Comments? Fine. Just fine. Okay. Let's keep going.
I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as He would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my requests bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. Okay,
so 2 paragraphs up where it starts with, there I humbly offered myself. We see step 1, step 3, step 4, step 6, 7. The next paragraph, my schoolmate visited me. We see 5, 8, 9. Now we see test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. That's step 10. And that's a spot check inventory, but it's also kind of folded into the nightly review, which is because step 10 says continue to take personal inventory, and inventory is something written. So there's some writing to be done at the end of the day, and it kind of follows up on how well did I really do that spot check? How well did I, when I was agitated, pause and pray and not respond the way I used to? And that's why they talk about common sense becomes uncommon sense. Instead of, telling that driver who cut me off that he's number one, I let the next driver in, and I just, because I'm the same when I'm out there. And so it talks about we're going to test our thinking against that new God consciousness within. And it says here, my friend asked me to explore a new relationship with God. If I ever felt doubtful or confused, to sit quietly and ask God for direction and strength. That's meditation and prayer, right? Pray to God and wait for the result. If I don't get a result, if I don't have to do anything, don't do anything. Wait, right? And then it says never to pray for ourselves, to pray only for the knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry it out. And that will bring the recovery to me that I need. And then it says, my requests need to, bear on my usefulness to others. And then I will receive it in great measure. Because I've put myself out there to help other people. And think about what happened when I was 11, 12 years sober, and my mother had died, which was sort of expected. She was quite old and ill. But 2 weeks after she died, I had just gone back to work. And the day I went back to work in Ohio, I got a call that my boyfriend died after surgery. There was no expectation of him to die, and it was very sudden and unexpected, and I had to leave work again and drive home from Cincinnati and begin the process of dealing with all that entailed. And I got home, and there were 7 women on my porch just waiting for me. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, actually. I was like, I don't know what but they wanted to be there for me, and it was all because I had helped them. And realizing that I needed that support, just the presence of them made me feel so comforted. Those are the kind of things that happen. We give, and we get in full measure, we get return. And that's happened, throughout my sober life, but that one stands out. And I don't remember how I drove home 7 hours. I remember being on the phone a lot, but God showed up in a big way with his angels. And so it tells me, 10 and 11. And then we're going to get to the reading on step 12, which is a whole page.
Anybody want to share?
That's all part of it. Good for you.
Jen, alcoholic.
Hey, Jen.
So I definitely felt very awkward when I first started praying on my knees, but now I feel incomplete if I don't, like I'm skipping out on it. But with me, it's been pounded into my head that, like, if I want to experience God or my higher power, I have to seek him or her or it. I have to take the effort, make the effort, and seek. And since I've really truly heard that and it has sunk in, I just notice things in my life that I wouldn't normally be aware of. It's just kind of given me like this, I don't want to say enlightened because that sounds, but just this different thought process where I notice things that I didn't used to, and it's kind, I guess that's kind of like a God consciousness, and I the inventory for me is, where I can spot, behaviors that are cropping back up, but I can pray about that and ask God, like, what can I do? Mostly it's get out of my own way, so that I can be of service to other people. And that's that, I don't know, since I've started to really try to work on being God conscious and service to others, you were talking about how like your life just gets flip-flopped almost, and mine certainly has, because the first half of my life, or more than that, I was a very selfish, self-centered person, and I came in here that way, like a lot of us do. But you know, this program, it keeps me right-sized, and so I don't make as many hurtful mistakes as I used to, because I'm trying always to think about the other person, or, you know, just not myself. I'm not thinking about, well, what's in it for Jen, or, you know, what can I do to make it better? It's getting out of my own way and just letting it happen. I don't know, I'm kind of rambling there, but that's all.
Well, you know, what you explained was a new world came into view.
Oh, yeah.
That's, you know.
It did, yes. Hey,
Zion. Thank you. You know, the whole idea is that we've decided to go all in, right? You know, if we've decided we're going to go with God, then we go all in. God's the biggest thing, can do anything, can provide anything I need. God created me, knows my heart, and it's amazing. If I decided just to apply that, just try it for 90 days, you know, the 90-day phrase, we use it for everything. We'll start to see things manifesting that might have been desires of our heart that we didn't even know, and we're getting them automatically because we are serving our Creator. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, hey, my name's Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, the book talks about living in the world of spiritual make-believe. You know, we all had that Santa Claus God. You know, here's what I need, and if you love me, you'll give it to me. It's just got to be quick. Yes, Siobhan.
My name's Siobhan, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Siobhan.
Good. I mean, that's the thing, that we need to use the tools.
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to come to us. We ask for this, and then, unfortunately, it's a process. And it talks about in the book that it's an analysis. It doesn't sound very spiritual, but that's the path for us that is most successful. Jennifer, can you take us out real quick?
Yeah, I just had a quick question about, and I've been meaning to ask my sponsor about this, where it says, never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. I mean, what if you genuinely have like a prayer for yourself, like, you know, help me to be stronger, or, you know, it's just anything in general that maybe you're worried about your health, or maybe you're, you know, concerned about something and asking for God to show you the way, or what have you. I'm just kind of confused where it says you're never supposed to pray for yourself except when it's helping somebody else. I don't really get that.
Okay, so let's say worrying about your health. Is any moment of worry going to help get your health better? I don't think so.
No.
I don't think worrying about health makes our health better. I think it makes it worse. And it's bondage of self. So you have to look at each thing and ask yourself, is it selfish, or is it asking for God's will for me? For instance, it's so funny that my home group meets on Sunday night. I don't want to go to a meeting on Sunday night. It's in the fall. There's football on. I'm sorry. That's very important to me. But this is most important. And so I have to just ask myself, am I asking for something that's for me only, or will it help somebody else? And I think that's the key. I think being delivered from the bondage of worry is a good thing to ask for, because then you can help somebody else. You know, taking my mind off myself so that God can do the worrying, even though he doesn't. You know, and actually anxiety, if I am anxious, then I'm not prayerful. I can't do both. So I think you have to ask yourself in case-by-case situations, and then go over those with your sponsor. Because I think you'll find that a lot of what you're praying for really will help somebody else. But usually the knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry it out is really all I need. I just got to get me off my mind. And that's kind of the bait and switch, you know? Thanks, everybody, for a good meeting.